Hello friends, I hope all of you can see my screen. Okay, okay, perfect. So today's webinar, we would have a first discussion about an extremely important subject, which is polity. Before we get into polity, at least I understand that if you are an aspirant who's aspiring to take the civil services examination, okay, first things first, we'll make this session bilingual in nature, so we'll have Hindi as well as English. If anybody is not able to understand whatever I say in one certain language, please revert with a question or raise your hands. We'll get back if you're not able to understand, and we'll have a basically informative session regarding how to go about preparing for polity in the UPSC civil services examination. The key being, first is, of course, we know that there's a prelim stage, there's a mains stage, two stages of this examination. The third being, of course, that test of personality in terms of personal interview. However, having said that, for the prelims stage, if all of you can see my screen, I just mapped the number of questions asked specifically from polity from the year 2000 till 2019. That is, every year you see the exact number of questions that have been asked. For example, in 2000 the number was 12, 2001 it was 12, 2002 it was 19, so on and so forth till 2019, where we had 15 questions. Okay, so having established that, if we take an average of this, we can say that broadly there are definitely 15 questions out of 100 questions in the prelims stage from polity. The significance is, polity is as a subject, if it's not an abstract subject. There's always a right answer, there's a wrong answer. So out of these 15 questions, if your concepts are absolutely spot on and clear, then what will happen is, if you're able to, let's say, do all these 15 questions correctly, 15 times 2 is 30. So you straight on get 30 marks in your prelims examination. And as all of you know, the basic cutoff for prelims goes around somewhere 100 to 110. If you consider the cutoff to go in this range, you see you have almost 1/3 of the cutoff can be obtained just by being accurate and through polity. And 1/3 is more than enough for you to get a significant edge over other participants. So, having said that, the target is to be able to sure shot get this 30 marks that you can score from polity. Is the same story getting repeated in mains as well? If we see, or if we try to analyze what has happened in mains examination, I have plotted the amount of marks which is asked directly from polity. That is, again, similarly, starting from 2000 to 2019, the marks asked for polity, with 2000 being 130, 100, 130, 100, 100, 100, being 130, 66, 66, so on and so forth. The reason of why I have marked or highlighted 2013 is because it is this year which had extensive change of the mains examination. That is, since 2013, we have had a dedicated GS2 paper in the mains examination, which literally understands, or which stands for polity, governance, welfare and social mechanisms, and international relations. So, since 2013, that paper GS2 carries a weightage of 250 marks. Out of 250, we are consistently seeing that you can at least have 100, 110, 125, 125, approximately 50%, 40 to 50% of this is again straight from polity. So having established this fact that polity is absolutely essential for you to score a good mark, to at least score threshold marks for clearing the prelims and going further for mains also, this carries a significant contribution towards your success. Having said all of it, this is the reason why everybody, anyone worth his salt in this preparation journey, considers and knows for this fact that polity is absolutely important. However, having said that, then is there a shortage of material? Absolutely not. Why? Because polity is definitely stems or the whole origination originates from the Constitution of India, being the first basic thing that you need to understand. And it is from this rooted approach that everybody says that the importance of polity to clear this examination cannot be understated. You have to read it and you have to read a lot of it. However, friends, having said that, what happens is this drives us to the fact that okay, we need to read about the constitution. Okay, there's 11, there's NCRT class 11, class 12, both have political system and governance in them. They are related to the constitution. We itself have the Constitution of India. Everybody knows that Mr. Lakshmikant sir's book is absolutely famous, so much so that everybody even refers to it being as the Bible for polity, Sir Lakshmikant's book. And at the same time, we also have D.D. Basu sir's book. Having understood all of this, let us just put how much one has to study. If you map out the length of constitution in words for different countries in the world, this is just an interesting map that I came across. Are you able to see that India here, we have the lengthiest constitution in words? That award actually goes to India, and the word count being more than or approximately 1,46,000 words. Consider, let's say, for the case of United States, where we just have 7,000 words, or Russia, let's 12,000 words, Australia being 17,000. However, our old ally South Africa has a little bit higher number, which is 43,000. Brazil 64,000. But one thing is clear from this diagram, that there is no constitution in the world which is as long and as beautiful and as dynamic as the Constitution of India. Having said that, now comes the pain points of polity. Why? Is the material exhaustive? Absolutely. The material is extremely exhaustive because we have already established that you need to read a lot. But then, is there any shortage of material? No, there is absolutely no shortage. You have so many, there's a plethora of books, be it Lakshmikant, be it D.D. Basu, be it the Constitution of India itself, and so on, be it material of coaching institutes, be it Prayas's material, and so on. So, what should be your strategy to read all of this? Do you have to read all of this? Or can you avoid reading all of this? So, what should be the strategy? I believe I couldn't put, I wouldn't have been able to put it in a more better way. That is, everybody says you need to somehow, I understand, students have this vibe or aspirants have this common vibe that polity is kind of a dry subject, or polity is something in which you have to remember a lot. So we already know that the Constitution of India is so huge, and you have to remember a lot of subjects, a lot of articles, a lot of provisions and all. But the key is to get the logic behind it, to have clarity of thought, as in why this provision was there in the Constitution of India, to have the clear cut understanding that how this is related to some other aspect of life. And last but not the least, revision, revision, revision. And when you think you're almost done, revision again. I couldn't emphasize more on this because there's a certain amount of capacity and a certain amount of, information that the human brain can actually take in. However, to be able to retain most of it, to be able to understand most of it, you seriously need to revise. Having said that, is revision enough? Because if it is a course of self-study, or if it is something that you need to study on your own, then how and where does the Prayas India come into picture? We will show you. See, you can imagine the whole constitution or polity to be an entanglement of multiple threads. Consider, this provision is related to this provision is related to the president, this is somehow related to the governor, this is somehow related to the states, this is how, union relation between the union government and the state government. So many threads are there together in a bundle. But we here at the Prayas India will show you how to get hold of a trail, that is how to establish a logical train of thought which will help you understand most of what the Constitution of India says. And then if you use sheer logic, a little bit of efforts, and then I believe quality will stop being dry and it will be the most interesting subject, which will be an eye opener to all of you. But again, they say the proof of the pudding is in eating it, right? So let's eat the pudding. So today, I think, and I have set out with a goal to give you a brief glimpse about how to start polity. Everybody says polity is related to the Constitution of India. However, to be able to start, where should one start? That is chapter 1, page number 1, paragraph 1. No, I tell you, if the first thing, what do we look in a book? We look at every book by default has its contents page. So before you are able to understand what is the Constitution of India, you need to know what is there in the Constitution of India and how is it arranged. That is where we need to say, or we need to see that the Constitution of India is divided into parts and is divided into schedules. And today, I believe after this 1 hour, all of us will be on the same page where we would have memorized and understood how the Constitution of India is arranged into parts and schedules. And if you remember this, the benefits of which I'll share with you at the end of the session. Having given this background to you, now let us understand a little bit of history and logic behind the necessity or requirement of the Constitution. It is said that for a democratic country like India, nothing is above law and nothing is above the Constitution of India. So anything that exists in our country, be it related to administration, be it related to polity, be it related to how the country is run, everything has its root in the Constitution of India. Having said that, so the first question is, what makes a country? It's logical, right? There has to be a country and only then there will be a constitution of that country or India per se. So what makes the country? Logically, first thing we can say that, sir, land makes the country. That is the geography, that is this part of the world or this part of the land or this part is actually India. It makes sense. So definitely the first part of the constitution needs to be India and its territory. Because first you need to establish the fact that what is a country or what comprises of the country geographically. So the first part of the constitution is the union and its territory. Having said that we have defined that, okay, this state or this union territory or this part of the world or this geography is included in India. Having established that, is that the true definition of India? No. It is said that a country is made by the people who stay in them. So the people who stay on that land, they also need to be identified. And that is exactly what the constitution does. Why? We have part 2, which is citizenship. Thus, we can say that part 1 is geographically it somehow defines India, that is the union and its territory. And then we have the people. We need to identify who are the Indians, that is who are living in this land, that is who are the citizens of this country. That is that is part 2, which is citizenship. Having defined this much, you define a land, that okay, this is the country. You define who are the people who living in that country, that is citizenship. Then it is believed that these citizens need to have some kind of rights. All of us know that we were ruled by the Britishers for more than 400 years. 1600 is the year the East India Company was officially established, and it started its exploits in India. So from 1600 to 1947, broadly 347 years, and for the sake of convenience, it is said 400 years. But after having ruled for 400 years and after having required to fight for our freedom, doesn't it make sense that for a country to be formed, this country needs to assure its citizens or assure the people certain rights which are very basic in nature? And that is exactly what the constitution does. Having established the geography, having established the people, who are having identified the people, the third part has to be the fundamental rights. It is these rights of the people. Then we can say that it is these fundamental rights which were inspired from USA. After having fundamental rights, you give certain rights to the people, but then how will you ensure that the constitution has to be a living document? That is, once it is penned down or once it is written, the constitution exists or aims to exist forever. Then how will you communicate to the government who will govern this country? How will you communicate to the government that this is the welfare of the people, that a government should function towards the benefit of the people, a government should work on these fields? You also need to bestow some sort of responsibilities on the government, for the government to operate. Okay, that this is the guideline. Then that guideline is nothing but part 4 of the constitution, which is directive principles of state policy. What it means is, let us just break down. Whenever you come across a phrase or whenever you come across a couple of words, please understand the meaning or implication of each and every word. So what here happens is directive, which is they give sort of direction, that okay, or guiding principles, what we say. Principle, of course, the word I assume is self-explanatory. So you have some principles which give you a direction or which show a direction. To whom? To the state. Please understand that here state, in this form, in the form of a noun, here state stands for the country, unlike the states of India. No, here state means essentially India. So directive principles of state policy. So the constitution envisages a policy which contains all the principles which give a direction for all the governments to operate in the future. It is simply a way of saying, just like you ensured or you gave these rights to people, you need certain kind of directions for the government or a guideline on which the government should function. So that is part 4, which is directive principles of state policy. Having said this much, then please understand that, please note the numbering here. It started off with 1, then we went on to 2, then we went on to 3, then 4. After 4, logically, after 4, it should be 5, right? So, and that is exactly how it happened. After 4 came 5. So if after 4, 5 came, where is this, or what is the story behind something called 4A? Please understand that the constitution needs to be a living body. It was penned down. Then if some changes occur in the constitution, and if something is inserted in the middle, it does not make sense. That is, if the numbering had been 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. Suppose I want to insert something between 4 and 5. One way of doing it is, you again, whatever you insert, you name that as 5, and then this will become 6, so on and so forth. There is one number succession in the numbers, but then one small change in the middle will create a cascading effect of changes throughout the sequence. So does it really mean that to make one change in the constitution and then you have to change all the numbering? It does not make sense. Rather than doing that, what can be done otherwise is, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on. And if you want to insert something between 4 and 5, you can insert in the form of 4a. Then what happens is 4a gets inserted, but this old numbering continues. So we still have 5 in between. And this is exactly what happened in the case of our constitution. So here we see that there's a part called 4a. I told you, by this guiding principle, you can understand that 4a was definitely inserted later. So if our constitution was actually penned down and get ready by 1949, our constitution was adopted on the day of when India became a republic, that is 26th of January 1950. So 4a definitely was inserted after 1950. A little bit of insight or a little bit of knowledge and understanding will tell you that 4a was actually introduced in 1976 in the form of an amendment. What's an amendment? To amend. The etymology, please understand the etymology of the word. Etymology itself means how or what, how a word originated or what is the meaning of that word. So if you consider the etymology of the word, something called amendment, to amend comes from to amend, means to change. So any kind of change which happens in the constitution is referred to as an amendment. So just for the sake of information, please be patient with me. Let us for now just remember that part 4a was introduced by the 42nd Amendment 1976. What is this? Here we call it as fundamental duty. Please understand, the original constitution described the territory, described who are the citizens of this country. It gave those citizens certain rights. Then it told the government what to do or what guideline to follow in the form of directive principles of state policy. And then it proceeded to the union government. At least we know for sure, all of us at least know, we are on the same page, that in India, we have a union government, that is the central government, which sits in Delhi and over which actually rules over the entire of India. And at the same time, we also have the state governments, that is government of Maharashtra, government of Gujarat, government of Bihar, government of UP, so on and so forth. So having said that, when you have this kind of two-tier governance structure, that is, you have a union government and then which rules over the entire of the country, and then the country is divided into states and each state has its own governance mechanism. So we have a two-tier governance structure. So it makes sense that the constitution needed to make provisions for the union government and then below which the state government. So after part 4, we have part 5, which is the union government, part 6, which is the state governments. Okay. So please understand that from 4, we went to 5. So in 1976, during the prime ministership of Madam Indira Gandhi, it was envisaged that citizens of a country have fundamental rights, उनके पास कुछ अधिकार हैं. The government has certain duties or responsibilities or guidelines that the government need to follow, which is in the form of directive principles of state policy. But then where are the duties of a citizen? Is it not necessary that a citizen can enjoy some rights? The government has some duties. Similarly, does the citizen not have a duty towards their country? Of course, they should have. So it was believed and it was thought that this aspect of thought had actually been missed in the constitution. And as a result, we introduced part 4A, which is fundamental duties. That is the duty of every citizen of India. There are a basic list of 11 fundamental duties which are needs to be part of the constitution. So that is how part 4A was inserted. Then I told you the original constitution, we had part 5, which is the union government. And because we had the union government, it makes perfect sense to have the next part, which is the state government. Having established till part 6, then parts we had something called part 7, which is the states in part B of the first schedule. What is this? There is another kind of story that initially India was divided into 4 kind of zones. That is, there were part A, part B, part C, and part D. What are again part A, B, C, and D? Part A were, let us consider, please, when we are studying about the constitution or thinking about how the constitution is made, let us not be in 2020 or not be in 2021. We have to think from the perspective of, let us think that we are sitting in 1949. So in 1949, immediately after we got independence in 1947 from the Britishers, we saw that India was actually comprising of one part, which was the British territories. They were essentially British territories. They had been British territories. Second part is they had been princely states, that is, jo Rajwade, which we tell in Hindi, independent small kingdoms which were ruled by kings, but however, which became part of India. So it was princely states which had legislatures in them. So that is part B. This is part A. Princely states with legislatures. We had a part C, which is called British Chief Commissioner territories. These were small cities which were too small to be called a kingdom, and at the same time they were also not a British territory. They were under someone who was called a commissioner, because if it is a British territory, it could have gone under the form of a governor. Like if you understand in history, there used to be a governor of the presidency of Bombay, there used to be a governor of the presidency of Madras, there used to be a governor of the presidency of Bengal, that way and so forth. So these are British territories. However, if you consider small towns like Awadh, small towns like Indore, these were small areas which were too small to be a kingdom, but they were directly under British commissioner. They were being ruled. So you had part C, which is British territories of the British commissioners, and the lone part or the last part being Andaman and Nicobar Islands. This is how India was classified at the time the constitution was written in 1949. So it makes sense that you can define union government, you can define state government, but apart from union government and state government, there were somehow certain princely states which were being ruled by princes or kings. So that's also a kind of a rule which needs to be recognized. So apart from the union government and the state government, we had one thing which is called states in part B of first schedule. See, till now in our journey, we have seen that I have been trying to explain the whole journey in a very logical way. Having said this much, I told you, then we had the onset of something called, we still see something called Union Territories of India. So it made sense that you need to have part 8, which is Union Territories. So then you had the union government, the state government, states in part B of first schedule, and then you had the union territories. Clear? This is how at least from part 1 to part 8 we can remember. Then comes part 9. All of us know, Gandhiji used to say, India lives in its villages. And now we know that villages have panchayats, which are considered the third level of governance in India. We have third level of rural governance in the form of panchayats, and we have third level of urban governance in the form of municipal corporations. So it makes sense that having established a two-tier level of governance, the union government, the state government, and then state government of provinces which had princely states. So that also we had in part 7. So it makes sense we had part 8, which is union territories. Having completed all the two levels of governance, the third level of governance needs to be inserted. So it makes sense that after 8, we had part 9, which is the panchayats. Clear? So we had the panchayats, which is third level of governance in India, rural India. However, we need to understand that when the constitution was again written in 1949, we did not have these municipalities. We did not have municipalities. So if we have the panchayats, the third level of other governances, which include the municipalities, it is again part of 9A. Why A? Because I told you anything which is named A, B, or something like that in the parts of the constitution, they were originally not part of the constitution. Thus, it makes sense that 9A was inserted later. It is exactly similar in story to part 4A. So similarly, when 9A was introduced, I told you 4A was introduced as part of 42nd Amendment, 1976. Similarly, the municipalities were inserted by the 74th Amendment of 1992. So prior to which we did not have 9A. Similarly, now constitutional recognition is also given to cooperative societies. For example, you have Amul, which is Anand Milk Union Limited. It is a beautiful example of a cooperative society. So you have the constitution recognized these cooperative societies also, that it is in itself a third level of governance as well, because this is where a lot of these people get together, be it a farmers society, be it society of other producers or other manufacturers or rural marketers who want to get and collect itself into a cooperative. So that is also kind of a third level of governance. So to give constitutional recognition, this was mentioned in part 9B. However, if it is 9B, it definitely was to have inserted after 1949. So this was also inserted. And if 9A, if you remember, it was in 1992. 9B has to be either 1992 or after that. So a little bit of digging will tell you that part 9B was introduced as part of 97th Amendment 2011. Don't worry about these dates, because once you get the hang of it, you need to remember very little information. For example, these dates, and when you start proceeding further, these dates will be definitely at the back of your mind. So don't worry about the dates, just understand the flow, the logic, and the train of thought. So after 9B, then please understand that we have, or the constitution envisaged or thought, that there are certain areas in India in which you have certain people living who need constitutional protection. That is, there exists certain tribes. Consider, the whole northeast part of India is entirely resident of several small tribes. Even in the mainland of India or in peninsular India, you have the Gonds, the Bhils, and all. So you have so many small amount, little bit tribes living in India. They need to be identified because they cannot be treated as a state, because a tribal population lives in an area which is micro with regards to a state. So for them to have a constitutional recognition, you also need to make constitutional provisions for them. So after having established the three tiers of governance, it makes sense that these areas also need to be mentioned. So we have part 10, which is scheduled and tribal areas. So basically, from part 1 to part 10 of the constitution, you have entirely established as to, in essence, what comprises India. Let's do a quick revision. Part 1, the union and its territory. Part 2, who are the people living in India? What is that? Is part 2 is citizenship. For the people living in India, or for someone who's living in India, what are the rights that you can give? That is fundamental rights. After giving rights to those people, to ensure that the government also has some sort of guideline, that is part 4, that is directive principle of state policy. Having established the duties of the government, you need to say what is the government, that is part 5, which is the union government. You need to have a second level of governance mechanism, which is part 6, the state government. After having part 6, I told you, consider that you are in 1949. So there was princely states also. So that is part 7, which is states in part B of first schedule. Then part 8, you have union territories. After this is all second level of governance. You finish up to union territories. Then you have the third level of governance, that is part 9, which is panchayats. Panchayats, originally it was part of the constitution, so it is 9. But then urban areas or cities right now have municipalities, but earlier it was not there when the constitution was written. So that has become part 9A. Then we have part 9B, which is cooperative societies. And then ultimately part 10, which is scheduled and tribal areas. So we literally defined whole of India in form of these 10 parts. After having defined 10 of these parts, a logic will come. Okay, we have established that there's a union government. We have established that there will be a state government. What is the relation between these two? We just established that there's a union government in part 5, there's a state government in part 6, but what is the relation between the union and the states? We didn't explicitly mention it anywhere. So if we didn't explicitly mention anywhere, that is exactly what part 11 is. That is, part 11 is nothing but relation between the union and the states. After having part 11, which is relation between the union and the states, we established that, okay, there will be a union government, part 5, there will be a state government, part 6. What is the relation between the union government and the state government? What are the relation? That is in part 11. But at the end of the day, it is said, life is all about money. Somehow the aspect of money needs to come in. So till now, we didn't mention anywhere in the constitution that where is money or what is finance. So somehow it needs to get mentioned. So after having relation between the union government and the state government, it makes sense to talk about money. And that is exactly what part 12 is. That is, part 12 is finance, property, contracts, and suits. That is part 12. After part 12, then you have something. You talked about money, you talked about property, you talked about how contract will happen. But then specifically, there is one thing that you didn't talk about, that is trade. You talked about finance, you talked about property, you talked about contracts, you talked about suits. Suits, kya matlab? It is not the suit that we wear. A legal case is also termed as a suit. So anything which is a legal complication, how it can be happened or how it can be dealt with, all these parts are dealt with part 12. After part 12, it makes sense that part 13 is trade, that is trade, commerce, and intercourse within the territory of India. You talked about money in part 12. You talked about finance, property, contracts, and suits. But trade, you didn't talk about. And trade needs to have a separate part, which is part 13. Trade, commerce, and intercourse within the territory of India. Having said this much, then part 14. Part 14 can be a placeholder. What is a placeholder? Placeholder is something, for example, of what is a photo frame? What is a photo frame? It is a place where you hold a photo, right? That is what the purpose of a photo frame is. It holds a photo. So anything which holds a place, a sample that you will never tend to forget, you can call that as a placeholder. Why is part 14 a placeholder? Because all of the people who are watching this video, you are somehow aspiring to be civil servants. You are aspiring to take the civil services examination. And my dear, the civil services examination exists because it was a part of the constitution, and it's still a part of the constitution, which is part 14, that is services under the union and the states. So the very basic of reason of what is your career going to be, what you are aspiring or dreaming to be it an IAS, be it an IPS, be it an IFS officer, be an IRS officer, and all these services, they exist in India because these services are mentioned in part 14 of the constitution. So be what it may, the way of looking at it is you should never forget part 14 of the constitution, because that is the reason, or that is the reason why you are putting in so much efforts. So you can remember 14 as services under the union and the states, right? Okay, having given that story, 14, earlier it was thought that, you have these kind of services, that is IAS, IPS, IFS and all. If any trouble happens, or if any case happens, there's somehow a case is registered against an IAS officer or an IPS officer or an IFS officer, who will deal with all these cases? Earlier, of course, there are courts in India, there's the high court, there is supreme courts and stuff. But however, it was thought that no, later, it was thought that to address cases or to address issues specifically regarding these services, you need a dedicated tribunal for them. A tribunal means, you can think of it as a court. And the reason of why it is called a tribunal is, once if a tribunal sentences or gives you a sentence or gives you a decision, that kind of becomes binding. You cannot resolve, or you cannot go and tell that, you put it in another case. You see in these Bollywood films, right? You lose the case in high court, and then you're like, okay, now hum Supreme Court mein appeal karenge. We'll appeal on a higher court. But the very basis of having a tribunal is, once if a tribunal takes a decision on something, that is binding and it cannot be challenged on anyone else. So it was thought that there needs to be a tribunal to address cases regarding all these services. So then, if it is related to services, it is part 14. And if it was introduced later, it is 14A. So 14A tells you the story that originally it was not part of the constitution. And then when 14A was introduced, tribunals, that is 42nd Amendment. When did 42nd Amendment happen? See, this is how interconnections or logic happens. 42nd Amendment we learned earlier, that is exactly when part 4A was introduced, that is fundamental duties, 42nd Amendment of 1976. So here also, if I'm telling you tribunals were introduced by 42nd Amendment, you need to know it is 1976. So you remember 14 is a placeholder for you. It is the reason of why you are taking this examination, services under the union and states. Having remembered 14, you can never forget 14A, that is tribunals. Chalo, 14A tak we understood. 14A ke baad kya hai? We understood there is one part. We established the government in part 5, we part 6. We talked what is the relationship between the government, the union government and the state government in part 11. But how is the government elected? We are a democratic country. Elections hote hain. So all this election part was nowhere mentioned till now. So 14A ke baad, it comes logically that part 15 is elections. Having said elections, we need to know that, at least we know for sure that in India, be it a legislative assembly, that is state election, or be it the union government or union legislature ka election, we have certain constituencies which are reserved for SCs and STs. This is a SC reserved constituency, that is only people belonging to SC castes or SC category can stand in this election. Similarly, we have constituencies which are reserved. So if we talk about election, doesn't it make sense that after election, you need to mention that these are the special provisions for such kind of reservations in election? And that is exactly what it is. After part 15, you have part 16, which is special provisions relating to certain classes. What this certain classes is, in general, reservation for SCs, reservation for STs, reservation for Anglo-Indians. In what? In legislatures. That is, certain kind of constituencies will be reserved for SCs or for STs or for Anglo-Indians. So this kind of provisions is there in part 16. Having said this much, part 1 से लेके part 16 we understood the trail. 17 can be another placeholder for you. That is, you can remember there are two placeholders I told you. 14 services जिसके लिए हम इतनी मेहनत कर रहे हैं, that is services under the union and the states. 17 can be one placeholder, which is official language. Official language. India is a country which is believed to be a plethora of languages. इतने सारे languages होते हैं that sorry. I'm so sorry. Wait, I'll just start this sharing again. Yeah. So part 17 is one placeholder for you, which is official language. दो placeholder हो गए, 14 and 17. 14 is services, 17 is official language. 17 अगर official language हो गया, 18 is called emergency provisions. Let me just tell you the very basic of emergency provisions. Emergency ये कहती है, we in India we have envisaged a two tier level of governance. That is, you have a union government, you have a state government. However, there are some areas, for example Maharashtra currently, right, it is under the jurisdiction of the government of Maharashtra, and ultimately all these individual state government, they are held accountable by the union government. However, in case of exceptional circumstances, please mind my words, in case of exceptional circumstances, it was thought that such a dual tier or a double tier of governance will not be fruitful. You need to have one government which is ruling over the entire of India. That is, in such a kind of a case, what can be the example of such exceptional circumstances? One we can think of, let's say war, any kind of external aggression. For example, we need to say that when India is at war with someone, the Indian government in general needs to think about India as a whole and not as a form of states. So at that time we need to be one. That can be an example. Another example is during, for example, consider the case of a financial emergency. That is, when the credibility or the finance of the nation is at stake. अगर पूरे देश को चला पाने के लिए पैसे की कमी हो रही है, we cannot think of states, we need to think of as a country. So in these kind of special circumstances or exceptional circumstances, we need to have one government. जहां पे कि हमारा ये जो डुअल गवर्नमेंट था, यूनियन गवर्नमेंट स्टेट गवर्नमेंट, इट नीड्स टू बी कन्वर्टेड इनटू अ यूनिटरी गवर्नमेंट. This is one extremely unique aspect of our Constitution of India, and that such kind of provisions, because ये emergency होगा तभी ऐसे सब provisions लागू होंगे. So this thing is called emergency provisions. And ये कब आता है? After your second placeholder. That is 17 is the placeholder that I told you, official language. 17 के बाद 18 is emergency provisions. You had such an exhaustive list. 1 से चालू करके 18 तक हम पहुंच गए. From 1 to 18. So we covered most of it, right? Whatever is there in India. However, you always say, no matter how much hard you try, you always miss out on something. So it was believed exactly similar to the government of India. After thinking so much, you made the constitution, which is part 1 to part 18. You thought of all these processes, you thought of this logic, you thought of arranging it beautifully and everything. Still, there might be something that you somehow missed out. And you club all of them together and you put in the name of miscellaneous. And that is exactly what happened in the constitution. That is, after having thinking all this thought process from 1 to 18 you had, and 19 you had miscellaneous. सिंपल. एंड आफ्टर मिसलेनियस जो बचा कुचा था सबको क्लब करके मिसलेनियस में डाल दिए. एंड देन दैट गिव्स यू जस्ट वन लास्ट थिंग कि आफ्टर मिसलेनियस you talked about the constitution, you talked about the country, you talked about citizenship, you talked about government, you talked about rights, you talked about guiding principles, you talked about relation between the union and states, you talked about money, you talked about all of this. However, did you talk how the constitution itself can get changed? या कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को कैसे चेंज करना है ये तो हमने कहीं पे भी जिक्र नहीं किया. और अगर नहीं किया मतलब आगे कर लेंगे. सो आफ्टर मिसलेनियस व्हिच इज 19 वी हैव 20 व्हिच इज अमेंडमेंट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. दैट इज हाउ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इटसेल्फ कैन गेट अमेंडेड. एंड आफ्टर व्हिच स्टिल द सी प्लीज think from the perspective of 1949. You made a very beautiful document. 1 से लेके 10 तक तो आपने डिफाइन करा कंट्री को. 11 पे फिर आपने रिलेशंस डाला. 12 में फाइनेंस के और मनी के बारे में बात कर लिया. 13 में यू टॉक्ड अबाउट ट्रेड. 14 में सर्विसेज अंडर द यूनियन. 15 में इलेक्शन भी बात कर लिया. 16 स्पेशल प्रोविजंस भी दे दिया कुछ लोगों को. 17 ऑफिशियल लैंग्वेज भी बात कर ली. 18 यू ऑल्सो पुट इमरजेंसी प्रोविजंस. 19 जो बचा कुचा था वो भी बात कर ली. 20 which is how the constitution can be changed ये भी बात कर ली. However, all these things whatever you thought like 1 से लेके 20 तक this is the rigid part कि ये लिख दिया, this became the law of the land मतलब law of the land. However, it was thought कि कुछ चीजें ऐसी हैं जो temporary होनी चाहिए. There are some aspects which there are some provisions which were thought that it's by default this is temporary in nature. ये सारी चीजें तो आप परमानेंट वाली जैसे बात कर रहे हो ना 1 से लेके 20 तक. So it makes sense that all this kind of temporary provisions need to be clubbed together, and that is exactly what happened, which is 21, which is temporary, transitional and special provisions. And इतना आप लोग कर लिए, from 1 से लेके 21 तक आप कर लिए, which leaves you the last part, which is in general short title कि how the constitution will be referred, commencement, that is how the constitution कब से effect में आएगा, क्या है क्या नहीं, and authoritative text in Hindi, that is जो constitution है originally if it was written in English उसका हिंदी संस्करण, and उसके बाद repeals. कई बार ऐसा होता है that when you think that this is like really important, you just cannot afford to throw it away, right? जो भी अगर आप changes कर रहे हो, you need to maintain a record of those changes कि भाई हाँ ये change हुआ है, ये हटा है, ये add हुआ है, ये delete हुआ है, right? Which makes sense that anything which is deleted from the constitution or from the constitution also needs to be kept for the sake of record and purposes for us to know, for future generations to know. या फिर पता चला कि हम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में क्या चेंज किए हैं, no one has any record. या फिर कुछ रिमूव किए हैं तो कब रिमूव किए हैं, क्या है, no one has any record. This itself does not sync with the sanctity of such a holy or such a comprehensive document. तो इट मेक सेंस कि जो भी आप इसमें चेंजेस करोगे या काटोगे उसको भी कहीं पे अलग करके रखोगे. सो एनीथिंग व्हिच इज डिलीटेड फ्रॉम द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन दैट इज आल्सो मेंशन्ड और दैट बिकम्स पार्ट ऑफ द 22nd पार्ट व्हिच इज रिपील्स. रिपील, किसी को रिपील करना मतलब उसको हटा देना या फिर टू एब्सॉल्व. सो फॉर एग्जांपल किसी ने किसी को कोई सेंटेंस दिया, okay, that you are absolved of this crime, yeah, you have committed this crime, and if the sentence is repealed or if the sentence is brought back or if the sentence is removed, that is kind of a repeal. So anything which is removed from the constitution, that also needs to be kept for record purposes, and that is exactly where it is kept in part 22. So having said this much, all those people who are bearing with me till now would have understood that this is how you understand the whole trail and logic behind the arrangement or of the sequencing of the parts of the Constitution of India. Why is this relevant for civil services is my aspect, or how is this relevant in the case of civil services. Everybody knows that, okay, current affairs is something that we need to read. You come across an article, you come across an issue, See, I tell you that everything, anything, because this is the law of the land, because everything stems from the constitution. Anything that happens in India is somehow related to the constitution of India. If that happens, then you read an article which says, as per article 100 of the constitution, this happens. Or as per article 237, this happens. Or you come across, you read a current affairs newspaper, or you read, you are watching, let's say, Rajya Sabha TV, or doing something where it is written, as per article 242 of the Constitution of India, this happens, right? Is it possible for you to remember the whole constitution? Of course not. It's not humanly possible. Then how can you get a broad idea that, okay, if it is article 100, this must be somehow related to this. If it is article this, consider this. If someone asks you that, okay, you've read this book. Yes, I've read this book. Okay, then as per page number this of the book, it is this. If someone tells you something like this, you will be able to understand the head and tail of whatever that person is saying only if you have read that book, or only if you remember in that book, in that chapter, what is there. You might not remember the exact thing, but at least if you remember that, okay, this was there in that chapter, somehow you can connect it. For example, if someone tells you, okay, as for chapter 2 of this book, this is there, you will be able to understand the context only if you know what is there in chapter 2. So now that you know the parts of the Constitution of India, all these provisions of the Constitution are mentioned in the form of article. What an article is, you can imagine it to be, let's say, if you have Constitution, which is a book, okay, in that you have several parts. What are these parts? Parts are, like units in a book. You have the book, the units, and each unit has chapters, right? And the Constitution is exactly the same. If Constitution is the book, parts are the units. These units or these parts may have chapters in them, which are called as articles. That is, each article can deal with a certain provision or a certain aspect of something. Then, having said this much, if you remember the parts of the Constitution of India, half of your job is done. Then what happens is, you need to know which part has article number this to this. How will you remember that? That is also very logical and absolutely logical. You don't have to remember, you just have to remember a few placeholders, and that's it. For example, let us start our journey again. What is part 1? I told you, the union and its territory. You first need to define what comprises of the Union of India. So you put part 1, which is the union and its territory. Beautiful. I will tell you that the union and its territory has article number 1 to 4. Okay. What comprises, how will you remember? Okay, this is a very arbitrary way, sir. You are telling us that, okay, this has 1 to 4, but we might forget it is 1 to 4. My dear, if you know that what is 1, what is 2, what is 3, what is article 4, will it not be enough? And this is how we teach at Prayas. For example, if we tell you what is article 1, if we tell you what is article 2, if we tell you what is article 3 and article 4, will you forget that what is 1, 2, 3, 4? It will make logic. And once you understand what is there in article 1 to 4, you need not remember. You will automatically know that, okay, 1 to 4, it deals with the union and its territory. Right? So that is another story. But for now, we need to know, or we need to remember that, okay, the union and its territory means uske andar article 1 से 4 है. Logic. 4 के बाद ultimately 5 ही तो आएगा ना. 5 numbering हो रहा है तो sequentially. तो अगर 1 to 4 part 1 of the constitution है, it makes sense that citizenship needs to start from 5, right? So then I will tell you here, it is 5 to 11. Similar. सर ये कैसे याद रखेंगे? अगर आप प्रोविजंस जान लोगे कि 5 क्या बोलता है, 6 क्या बोलता है, 7 8 अप टू डॉट डॉट 11 क्या बोलता है, इफ यू अंडरस्टैंड द लॉजिक बिहाइंड इट और कि क्या है इन आर्टिकल्स में, इट विल बी वेरी इजी फॉर यू टू रिमेंबर कि 5 to 11 है मतलब इट हैज टू बी सिटीजनशिप। 5 to 11 अगर आपको पता चल गया, 11 के बाद कौन सा नंबर आएगा? 12, विच इज एग्जैक्टली विच इज फंडामेंटल राइट्स। 12 से 35। Sir, again, the same story, 35 Q, sir. Because if you know, if you read the chapter on fundamental rights, and if you know that article 12 क्या है, 13 क्या है, dot 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 35 क्या है, you will know that this is exactly what the fundamental rights is. And fundamental rights is an extremely important aspect of civil services. तो अगर आप फंडामेंटल राइट्स पढ़ लोगे उसका चैप्टर, यू विल नो दैट 12 से लेकर 35 के अंदर क्या है। तो वो आपको हो गया कि सर 12 to 35 है मतलब फंडामेंटल राइट्स हैं, ऑब्वियस। अब 35 तक अगर फंडामेंटल राइट्स हैं, डायरेक्टिव प्रिंसिपल्स ऑफ स्टेट पॉलिसी कहां से चालू होगा? इट हैज टू बी फ्रॉम 36 to 51। Again, sir, same story. If you know that part 1, 2, 3, 4 is somehow, you need to know each and every article because they are extremely important towards the functioning of India. So directive principles of state policy अगर आप याद रख लोगे, 36 क्या है, 37 क्या है, up to dot dot 51 क्या है, this is, you'll know that this is 51। फिर ओरिजिनली पार्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन 4 के बाद क्या आता था? 5। तो 5 has to start from 52। सर 4A तो बाद में इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ ना, एंड इफ 4A गॉट इंट्रोड्यूस्ड लेटर, यहाँ पे 51 है and the numbering is starting from 52, so I can put this as 51A, which makes sense, right? So if the union government is starting from 52, I will remember that it is from 52 to 151। कैसे? Again, the same story. If you broadly know 52 से 151 तक क्या है, see again, this is more than about 90 articles। तो इसका ये मतलब नहीं है कि 90 articles each and everything you need to know per se or you need to by heart. No, I don't mean to scare you off. You don't have to by heart the constitution. However, with progress level of chapters, the more chapters you start covering, for example, you'll know that जब आप मिनिस्टर्स के बारे में पढ़ेंगे, when you start reading about, see 52 to 151 is the union government। if when you read about the union council of ministers, you will know that okay, they have provisions, article 73, 74, 75। when it is dealing with president of India, you will know that okay, article 100 itna is for president of India। Similarly, so on and so forth, part 5 will get covered. And if it is getting covered at 151, state government, which is the next, it needs to start from 152। So this again is 152 to 237। How you need to remember? Again, when you study the chapter on state government and once you study the provisions, you will remember that it is 152 to 237। If it is till 237, part 7 is what? It has to be 238। This is exactly what it is, till 238। 7 can be a placeholder for you. Why? States in part B of first schedule, it can be a placeholder because 7 has only one article, which is 238। So that can be a placeholder. If you remember this as a placeholder, all the above you can arrange, right? If you arrange that, then you have part 8। Part 8 is again, if 238 tak ho gaya, part 8 has to start from 239। So if it is 239, I'll tell you that this goes on till 242। कैसे? सर आप जब यूनियन टेरिटरीज का पार्ट कवर करेंगे, you will know what is 239, what is 240, what is 241, what is 242। And then you'll know that 242, which is one article 242 specifically, used to talk about a small county called Coorg. It is extremely famous for coffee. It's in Karnataka and it's a very beautiful place. People go on vacation there. So Coorg, earlier it was a union territory. However, now union territories के list में है क्या? नहीं है. So it's a state, which means that 242 now does not exist। So now you know it is 241 till 241। but originally 242 तक यहाँ पे था, so panchayats has to start from 243, right? अगर पंचायत 243 एक ही आर्टिकल था एंड देन वी मूव्ड ऑन टू आर्टिकल 9 के बाद 10 आएगा, तो 10 हैज टू स्टार्ट फ्रॉम 244, सो वी हैड 244 एंड 244A। यहां पे आप देख सकते हैं कि 244 एंड 244A क्यों, क्योंकि रिलेशन ऐसा रखेगा 244A मतलब वो बाद में इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ होगा। एंड अगर जब बाद में फिर ये इंट्रोडक्शन हुआ पंचायत 242 से 243O तक गया। म्यूनिसिपैलिटीज, बिकॉज ये 9A के साथ ही रिलेशन है, 244 यहां आ नहीं सकता, इट कैन नॉट कम, सो इट हैज टू बी 243। 243 O के बाद क्या आता है अल्फाबेटिकली P, तो 243P टू 243ZG। ZG का क्या मतलब है, ABCD डॉट 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 अप टू Z, Z के बाद फिर ZA ZB ZC ऐसे करके टिल डॉट डॉट अप टू ZG। ZG तक यहाँ पे आ गया, सो दिस हैज टू बी 243। ZG के बाद क्या होगा ZH, 243 ZH से 243 ZB। Sir, now we are losing trail. How to remember all of this? My dear, when you consider or when you study the chapter on third level of governance, when you read the provisions for panchayats, when you read the provisions for municipalities, and you read the provisions for cooperative societies, you will know that it is related to 243. I'm not telling that specifically you have to remember it is 243 ZH, 243 ZO, 243 ZA. No, but what I'm telling you is if you remember this broad numbering, it will extremely helpful. For example, now let's say you're not remembering anything. You come across something which is as per article 243 ZC. Itna aega, if you remember this, you will instantly know, okay, 243 ZC. 243 ZC matlab it has to deal with municipalities. If you come across an article, this is exactly how this will help you, be it when you're reading current affairs or when you're doing anything. Having understood itna, then you have part 11, 244 tak to aa gaya part 10 mein. So it makes sense that relation between the union and the states 245 se chalu hoga. 245 se this goes on till 263. Again, in Lakshmikant sir's book, you have a chapter which is called relation between the union and the states or interstate relations. आप जब ये chapter पढ़ेंगे, when you get to know the provisions, you will automatically know that the beauty of that chapter is you'll know that article 245 say 255 is legislative relations, 256 say 263 is administrative relations. And then you can understand the specifics of this. So if you remember or if you study this chapter, you will not forget this numbering. So till 263 आप पढ़ लिए हैं, then finance, property, contracts and suits 264 से 300A. 300A is an extremely important article. Why? Because 300A is the article which is property. Property मतलब sir यही जो property है, a little bit of insight, and eventually when you study you'll know that right to property used to be a fundamental right. However 1978 ko right to property stopped being a fundamental right and it became a simple legal right. So this is what article 300A is, that is right to property. तो 1978 को इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ था, उससे पहले तक दिस यूज्ड टू एंड एट कितना 300. अगर 300 में खत्म हो रहा है, then the next number is 301, which makes sense, which is part 13. 301 से till 307. Again sir, it is difficult. How to remember 301 से 7? My dear, when you study this chapter called trade, commerce and intercourse within the territory of India, you will know what is 301 से 307. Then part 14, our favorite, placeholder, you should never forget that. That is article 308 to 323. Part 14A, A matlab it was later introduced. later introduced है, मतलब 323 के बाद जो 324 है, it should have come here to elections, which is exactly how it happened. 324 से 329A, so 323 चला गया, यहाँ पे 324 है, मतलब tribunal says 323A and 323B. Having understood till 329, which is part 15, part 16 is special provisions relating to certain classes. 329 tak you have in elections, so it is 330, 332, 342, 342A. 342A tak ho gaya. Then you have something called official language, which has to be 343, 343 to 351. Why, sir? Because when you study a chapter which is extremely important called emergency provisions, you will study that this is dealing with article 352 to 360. ये अगर 352 तक जा रहा है, that's how you'll know that this has to end at 351. So it's not, something that you need to like really remember. Just apply a bit of logic, and it needs a little bit of practice. These are the two things. For example, now if I ask you the question, what is 2 plus 2? You need not even think about it, and the answer automatically comes to your brain, that is 2 plus 2 is, sir, 4. But if I ask you, what is 629 plus 386? You instantly lose track. Why? Because you haven't had practice for 3-digit addition. Similarly, now what I'm telling you is, when I'm telling you here about the Constitution of India, initially this process might seem that, okay, this is a bit difficult, or I'm not able to comprehend, or I'm not able to remember, but it just requires a little bit of practice and a little bit of revision. जैसे हम गाने सुनते हैं तो गाने तो याद हो ही जाते हैं आफ्टर लिसनिंग टू 2 or 3 times. Similarly, UPSC or especially polity is all about revision, 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 and when you get exhausted, more revision of it. For example, if you are following me till now, you will be able to definitely understand that if you read current affairs, see, reading does not matter. What matters is how much you are able to understand or link of it. You read something, you read that article 370 was repealed, but my dear, if you read that article 370, I'll come to it now. Then you have miscellaneous provisions. Miscellaneous meaning you have 361 to 367. And then I told you part 20 is amendment of the constitution. That also can be a placeholder. When you read that how the constitution can get amended, or हम constitution में कैसे changes ला सकते हैं, you will know that this has only one article, which is article 368. एक ही article है उसमें. So आप 368 को तो याद ही रख सकते हो कि okay, this is amendment of the constitution. 368 है मतलब this has to end at 367, right? It's logical. And emergency provisions आप जानते हो, this is ending at 360 because आप पढ़े हो emergency chapter में, तो 360 में वो खत्म हो रहा है, तो the numbering has to be 361 से 367, right? Then comes temporary, transitional and special provisions. 368 तक आपका amendment हो गया, then this has to start from 369, so which is 369 to 392. This is where I'll tell you, for example, how to remember. क्या होता है, last year in 2019, when Jammu Kashmir stopped being a state and Jammu Kashmir was divided, the state of Jammu Kashmir was divided into 2 union territories, the Union Territory of Jammu Kashmir and the Union Territory of Ladakh. Widespread media coverage and news coverage was done that repeal article 370 is repealed, article 370 is repealed. Okay, you know this news, article 370. Now at the back of your mind, if you remember this way, that where 370 is figuring in the constitution, instantly your mind would have told you, okay, article 369 say 392 was temporary, transitional and special provisions. Oh, okay, right. So 370 was special provisions for Jammu and Kashmir. अब जब special provisions को ही खत्म कर रहे हैं, so 370 was repealed, which makes sense. If someone will tell you, as per Article 328, this time the Election Commission is doing something. But my dear, for you to be able to make the head and tail of the article, you need to know that, okay, 324 se 329A tak, it was elections. So it makes sense. Okay, this is somehow dealing with elections. So having shared this much, I can show you that how a beautiful mind map comes out of it. We did a rough work here. All of you need to have a A4 sheet, and this video will be there on YouTube. You can watch this video numerous times, multiple times till you understand. But then you can make an A4 sheet of your own where you write all the parts of the Constitution of India, where you write कौन सा article से कौन से article number तक इसमें है, and then you can really get a beautiful story out of it. And जितना आप पॉलिटी इस पे पढ़ेंगे, you can keep on making numerous additions to it. What are the level example of additions? Sir, for example, when you study the chapter of how states were reorganized in India, अभी और कोई ऐसा state है क्या जो किसी रजवाड़े के अंदर है? We don't have it. So if we don't have it, which is part 7 of the constitution, which is states in part B of first schedule, इसका कोई relevance नहीं है. रेलेवेंस नहीं है क्योंकि वैसा कोई स्टेट है नहीं. अगर नहीं है, वी कैन से दैट दिस इज नो लॉन्गर पार्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया. ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का पार्ट ही नहीं है. ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से कब हटा? जब आप वो चैप्टर पढ़ोगे, यू विल नो दैट दिस हटा इन 7th अमेंडमेंट 1956. क्यों हटा? क्योंकि 1956 में सर स्टेट्स रीऑर्गेनाइजेशन एक्ट आया था. So, if States Reorganization Act came in 1956 and ये fourfold classification of states रहा ही नहीं, तो ये part तो रहेगा ही नहीं. And that is exactly how you can link all that you are studying to the dynamic knowledge that is constantly evolving about how you can remember parts of the Constitution of India. So I'll just share, for example, see, this is somehow the final thing that you can have. That is the Union and its territory, Article 1 to 4. Citizenship, which India deals with single citizenship, Article 5 to 11. Fundamental rights, 12 to 35. Directive principles of state policy. Fundamental duties आ गया 4A, मतलब you can say that it was added in 46th amendment. उसके अंदर जब आप पढ़ोगे और क्या amendments हुए हैं, that you can write. And the one that I told you here, part 7, state, which is deleted by the 7th amendment 1946. Union territory, I told you this story that 242 is Coorg ka, so Coorg is no longer a union territory, so 242 khatam karke now it ends at 241. Here I will tell you that okay, the third level of governance सबसे ज़्यादा 73rd and 74th amendment में introduce हुआ था, so on and so forth. And for your information, this PDF, this specific mind map is already available on our website in the form of a mind map for those who are willing. And this was just a glimpse of how we teach you here at the Prayas India, of how we make polity extremely interesting to you, so that at the time when it matters, especially in the examination, you will be more than enough and more than clear with all your concepts, understanding, so that you can get a significant edge and ensure selection and success. So with this, I call the session off. However, now I throw open the dais for any kind of question and answer. If you have questions, please raise your hands. I'll unmute you and give you a chance to speak, post which we can address your questions. Hello, Kirti. I have permitted talking to you. So could you please ask your question? Naz, I have also unmuted you. You
Sir,
please feel free to ask your question.
ये तो पार्ट्स हो गए ना, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के ये पार्ट्स थे सारे, तो शेड्यूल्स करके भी कुछ होता है ना, तो वो क्या है? हेलो, अरे रुको.
Hello, Naz.
हेलो हेलो.
Kirti, you have to unmute.
अरे hello, am I audible?
Yes, dear, you are audible. Please go ahead.
Okay. ये तो पार्ट्स थे ना मैम, तो ये हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशंस में शेड्यूल भी है, तो वो शेड्यूल्स क्या है?
I think I'm not able to get questions. Preeti ma'am, could you please help and get in touch with and ask them questions, please?
Yeah, sir. Dear, please repeat your question one more time.
कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से ये पार्ट है 1 to 22, तो हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में शेड्यूल करके भी कोई पार्ट होता है, तो उसके बारे में जानना था, कुछ है ऐसा या नहीं?
हेलो नाज।
हाँ सर।
हाँ बोलिए।
सर शेड्यूल्स क्या होते हैं? जैसे कि ये तो पार्ट्स हो गए, शेड्यूल्स क्या होता है?
Naz, for the dearth of time, due to lack of time, we are not able to cover schedules. However, the way of looking at it is, schedules are something, you know, it's exactly how the constitution is arranged. या तो आप पार्ट्स में अरेंज कर सकते हैं, या फिर जो इंफॉर्मेशन पार्ट्स में नहीं अवेलेबल है उन सारी चीजों को क्लब करके यू कैन पुट इट इन द फॉर्म ऑफ शेड्यूल. So we can share, we can schedule another lecture regarding schedules, another webinar. But however, we'll inform you in due time. So that's just another part of the story.
Okay.
Do we have some further questions, please? If any of you have questions, then please raise your hands. We'll unmute you so that you can ask questions. As you wanted
Yes, sir.
You wanted to ask some question?
No, sir, I am done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have any further questions, please?
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, Vedangi, you're perfectly audible. Bataiye.
Actually, I wanted to ask, how can we avail the recording of this lecture?
Recording of this lecture, I presume it's already it's live on YouTube, and this will be available on our channel.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
So if we do not have any further questions, I think Preeti ma'am, we can call it a session.
If anyone has any doubt, please clear up it now. You can ask. So, sir, are you done with this session?
Yes, Preeti ma'am, I think.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, Kirti.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, Kirti, you're all.
Yes, dear.
Yes. Yes. Sir, I just wanted to ask, which book should I follow for the basic understanding of Constitution? Like, if I am a beginner, which book should I follow?
See, Kirti, what we can suggest is everybody follows Lakshmikant, and it's a standard book which everybody follows. And
Yeah.
however, given the caveat, let me be very honest with you. The way to understand is, please, it requires multiple amount of reading. Let's say if you're not able to understand one topic or one subject or even one sentence,
Yes.
the key is to keep reading it continuously, to search meaning behind it, and then you'll definitely be able to understand. Because in
Okay.
terms of language of the book or language of how it's written, it's extremely lucid and very easy to understand way. However, if you have any kind of queries or something, you can always reach us.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir, it was great learning by your side, and we gained a lot many knowledge. Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much to all the participants who have participated in this webinar. And we have more webinars scheduled. So next webinar is on Thursday. You all can come and join. So all the best, and please do join again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.